Hi there, welcome to another edition of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. The show exposes the unfolding world communist revolution. Please like the show, share us around, and subscribe on Epoch TV. As I said, there's information here you'll never see anywhere else. Well, today I'm going to talk about how communism is actually implemented. And most communist programs are implemented by non-communist governments. That's the reality. So how do they do this? How do small groups of communists actually impact policy on a national basis? Well, I'll give you an example for a start from New Zealand, then a couple of examples from the United States. Now, back in the 1980s, New Zealand had a pro-Soviet communist party called the Socialist Unity Party. At its peak, it was about 400 to 500 members strong in a country of about 3.5 million at the time. So you think, well, how could they possibly ever do anything? Well, this is how they did it. Back at the time, we were in the Cold War. The Soviet Union was aiming for world domination, as I believe Russia is today. And they wanted to militarily conquer Europe, but they had a problem. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is established by the free countries of Europe in alliance with the United States and Canada, to basically stand against the Soviet aggression. So while the communists had taken over all of Eastern Europe after World War II, they were blocked from conquering all of Europe by this strong military alliance. And Reagan was strong, and Thatcher was strong. The Pope was also standing against communism.
Let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world.
The Soviets were blocked, but the Soviets are chess players, and they believe that if you can't take out the king one way, you use your pawns elsewhere to take out the king. So they turned to New Zealand. New Zealand's a tiny country, but it's part of the Western Alliance. It is the weakest member of the Western Alliance, and the communists were strongest there. They controlled the labour unions, they had heavily infiltrated the New Zealand Labour Party, and they controlled the New Zealand peace movement. So this is what they did. In 1984, they took a small delegation of New Zealand communists to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. This was Jim Brown, this was Peter Devlin, this was Alan Weir, and John van der Ven, a New Zealander of Dutch extraction. Well, John van der Ven was actually a secret agent of the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. And I spent a lot of time in subsequent years interviewing this man and learning and picking his brains on how communism actually works. So they're at this big institute, 3,500 communists training from all over the world. They all learned Russian history, they all learned Russian language to some degree, they learned racial agitation, labor union agitation, everything they needed to be communist revolutionaries. Some of them were even trained in sabotage techniques, bomb making, etc. But anyway, so they were there, and the Soviets had a lot of experts there on New Zealand. They had about 16 people dedicated to New Zealand alone, sociologists, historians. They knew the religious history of New Zealand, the economic history, the social history. They knew the sporting culture. They knew more about New Zealand than most New Zealanders would dream of knowing. They were experts, and they knew New Zealand psychology. They knew that New Zealand was very strongly pro-American. They'd been saved by American troops in World War II from Japanese invasion. They knew it wasn't going to be easy to get New Zealand turning against America. So this would have to be a campaign to bring New Zealand out of the Australia, New Zealand, United States Military Alliance, ANZUS. This couldn't be an anti-American campaign. This had to be a pro-New Zealand campaign to really play on New Zealanders' idea that we punch above our weight on the world stage, and that we have some moral authority in the world. So the campaign was, the slogans were invented. This is New Zealand standing against the nuclear arms race. New Zealand is standing up for peace. New Zealand is striking an independent foreign policy course. So these four people went back to New Zealand. They held secret meetings with the peace movement, which they controlled, the unions, which they controlled, and the Labour Party, which they had heavily penetrated right to the top levels. Even David Lange, the Prime Minister after 1984, I believe, was in their pocket. So they mounted this campaign with the unions and the peace movement and the left-wing elements of the Labour Party. And when Labour was elected to government in late 1984, they set about banning US nuclear warships from our harbours. And they played it. You know, this is New Zealand standing against the nuclear arms race. This is Kiwi standing for peace. And a lot of New Zealanders bought it. Enough that they could pass the legislation. And they actually did that, and New Zealand was no longer a member of ANZUS, no longer in the nuclear alliance. And even today, most New Zealanders think that was an achievement. They think that was something that we did.
As you can imagine, Prime Minister Morrison was also very well aware that New Zealand was unlikely to be interested in building nuclear-powered submarines. Certainly they couldn't come into our internal waters. Our legislation means that nothing that is wholly or fully powered, no vessel that is wholly or fully, partially or fully powered by nuclear energy is able to enter into our internal waters. So that is in fact a position that has been held across parties for a long period of time.
They don't realise they were completely deceived by the Soviet Union and New Zealand communists. Unfortunately, Reagan and Thatcher didn't buckle. NATO remained. Even after the Soviets staged their big strategic retreat in the late 90s, the so-called collapse of communism, NATO remained and even expanded, as it should have done. Not necessarily all of the countries it expanded into, so I believe some of them, like Romania and Bulgaria, are still controlled by communists. But NATO stood strong and Russia stayed at bay. So what about other countries? What about the United States? Well, the key example we're looking at here would be Obamacare. For a long time, Americans resisted socialized healthcare. They knew that to give government control of your health, your body, was to give government control of your soul. Everything would follow. So they resisted it. They understood that the American healthcare system, as over-regulated and corrupted as it was still way better than full-on socialized healthcare. But as the American healthcare system got more and more semi-socialist, it became harder to defend. And the gap between real socialized healthcare and what had become in America became less and less. But still, Americans understood that it was not a good deal to give the government control of your health. It would cost you way more money, and it would certainly cost your freedom. The father of the socialist healthcare movement in America was a man called Quentin Young. He was a physician from Cook County Hospital in Chicago and a member of the Communist Party. He started one of the very first organizations promoting socialized healthcare in America. He started a few of them back in the 70s and the 60s. In the 1980s, he started Physicians for a National Healthcare Program, and this allied thousands of doctors all over the country, left-wing doctors. They sponsored tours of Canadian socialist doctors coming into America, telling everybody how great socialized healthcare was. By this time, Quentin Young had quit the Communist Party and joined Democratic Socialists of America. And in 1994, Democratic Socialists of America made socialized healthcare their #1 goal. Now, Democratic Socialists of America had started with Bernie Sanders the Congressional Progressive Caucus. This started out as 6 or 7 left-wing congressmen. Now it is about 90, and it is the communist transmission belt for socialist ideas into the Democratic Party. In 1994, the Democratic Socialists of America also took over the AFL-CIO. America was unique in the Western world that the labor movement was not controlled by communists. After 1994, that reversed. Under John Sweeney, a Marxist, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, the ban on communists holding office in the AFL-CIO was lifted, and the communists came flooding in and now controlled virtually every major labor union in the country.
Starting with the new leadership in the AFL-CIO that was elected in 1994, the prohibition on communists holding office in U.S. labor unions was dropped.
The labor movement is an essential cornerstone of transformative politics.
Now, every major labor union is controlled by communists and leftists. So what's the significance of that? If you control the labor movement, you control the Democratic Party, because there's hardly a Democrat that isn't elected with labor union help in this country. That's why the Democrats have gone so far left since the 1990s, because the DSA and the Communist Party took over the labor unions and started to dictate policy to the Democrats. That's why the change, people. And so Quentin Young was busy promoting socialized healthcare. He got it basically become part of the policy of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, mainly pushed by John Conyers of Michigan, who was also, though a Democrat, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, and other Marxist Democrats like Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, another longtime member of Democratic Socialists of America, and their allies. They started to build pressure inside the Democratic Party to go socialize healthcare. But the biggest insider they had was, of course, Barack Obama. And Barack Obama was a long-time friend of Quentin Young. Barack Obama's family were patients of Quentin Young's practice, and Young boasts openly how he influenced Obama into socialized healthcare.
Barack Obama, as we know, was a community organizer, a very lofty calling in my book, and he made the decision when the opportunity came that he could get more done politically, and he accepted the nomination for the seat in the state Senate. It's not that long ago, really. It's about 6 to 8 years ago. Barack Obama, in those early days, influenced, I hope, by me and others, categorically said single payer was the best way, and he would inaugurate it.
So when Obama got elected, he started pushing this very, very hard, and Democratic Socialists of America and Communist Party USA and AFL-CIO and Congressional Progressive Caucus all joined in, and eventually they got much of what they wanted implemented by the Democratic Party. Completely a communist operation. Another one, illegal immigration amnesty. Now, for most of American history, Americans have been very much opposed to illegal immigration. Yes, this is a nation of immigrants, but Americans reserved the right to decide who they admitted to their country. And for a long time, there's a bipartisan consensus against illegal immigration. If anything, it was the Republicans who were softer on illegal immigration because they were often dependent on money from big business, who was quite happy to have lots of cheap labor coming across the border. But even so, a Republican president, Eisenhower, deported 3 million illegal immigrants in 1 year alone during his term of office. The unions were opposed to it because they knew that illegal immigrants would take union jobs and break union strikes and lower union wages. Back in the 80s and 90s, Harry Reid, the Democratic senator, and Bill Clinton would give speeches condemning illegal immigration in the strongest terms, calling for repatriation of illegal aliens, because they were on the side of the unions, and the unions at that stage were not yet fully communist.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more, by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes, to better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan.
The real father of the illegal immigration movement was Bert Corona, a communist from Southern California, Los Angeles based, who started CASA and several other organizations promoting amnesty for illegals. And he worked with communists like Lorenzo Torres from Arizona and other communists from New Mexico and Texas to create pressure on the southern border areas to go soft on illegal immigration, to get them green cards, work permits, all of this kind of thing. Bert Corona trained a whole bunch of activists to carry on his work. One of them was Maria Elena Durazzo, who became head of the California AFL-CIO, very close to Democratic Socialists of America and the Communist Party, and now a California state legislator. She did a lot of work pushing the California Democratic Party in the direction of amnesty and sanctuary cities and that kind of thing. Another disciple of Bert Corona, the communist, was Antonio Villaraigosa, who became mayor of Los Angeles and amped up the sanctuary city status of that city. So thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants gravitated towards Los Angeles and later Orange County and helped to flip those areas more solidly democratic. By the time the 80s and 90s had rolled around and the communists took over the AFL-CIO, the unions were still anti-illegal immigrant. You know, Cesar Chavez, the darling of many of the Latino communist activists today, was militantly opposed to illegal aliens. He had people out in the fields turning people into the INS. One of the agents he used to do this is now married to the real head of the illegal immigration movement in this country, a man called Eliseo Medina, formerly top official in the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. His wife Lisa used to work turning in illegals for Cesar Chavez. Now she's married to the top champion of illegal immigration in this country. You know, Eliseo Medina is a long time a member of Democratic Socialist America, one of the leading labor officials in the country. And in 2000, at the AFL-CIO's National Convention in Los Angeles, Eliseo Medina engineered a flip in policy. The AFL-CIO turned in one meeting from being completely opposed to illegal aliens and illegal immigration amnesty to 100% support for illegal immigration amnesty. All done by Eliseo Medina, the Marxist. Now here's Medina talking to a meeting in Washington, D.C. in 2009. He reveals the real reason for this. It's nothing to do with helping foreigners achieve the American dream. It's all about bringing in millions of new Democratic voters over the border to create a one communist state in this country. Because the Democrats have gone so far left that they've burned off a lot of their moderate base. So you have to bring millions across the border to make up the difference and get a permanent governing majority.
Now, as you know, the negative tone of the immigration debate has created intense interest in the Latino and immigrant community. We, in the last election, had the largest turnout of Latino voters in our history. And everything tells us these voters fully intend to become engaged into the elections in the future. They have tasted what it is like to participate and win, and they are not going to go away because their involvement is basically because they feel that they are being taken advantage of, they are being singled out, and they are being scapegoated. Now, when they voted in November, they voted overwhelmingly for progressive candidates. Barack Obama got 2 out of every 3 voters that showed up. And so I think there's 2 things, very quickly, that matter for the progressive community. Number 1, if we are to expand this electorate to win, the progressive community needs to solidly be on the side of immigrants. That will solidify and expand the progressive coalition for the future. And let me tell you, when you are in the middle of a fight for your life, you will remember who was there with you. And immigrants count on progressives to be able to do that. Number 2, we reformed the immigration laws. It puts 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters. Can you imagine if we have even the same ratio, 2 out of 3, if we have 8 million new voters that care about our issues and will be voting, we will create a governing coalition for the long term, not just for an election cycle.
So guess what? Eliseo Medina was a member of Barack Obama's Latino Advisory Committee, along with several other Marxists. Here he is admitting that fact.
Your agenda's been my agenda in the United States Senate. Before debating health care, I talked to Andy Stern and SEIU members. Before immigration debates took place in Washington, I talked with Eliseo Medina and SEIU members.
Eliseo Medina, Democratic Socialist America, and the AFL-CIO made support for illegal immigration amnesty part of the Democrat program. A communist idea is now mainstream Democrat.
We agree that the immigration system is broken. It should be addressed. We should do more to fix it.
So I hope you now have more understanding on how communism actually works. This is how small groups of people, you know, Democratic Socialist America is now 90,000 people. For a long time it was 6,000 or 7,000 people. Communist Party USA is less than 5,000 people. But they can dominate the Democrats. By controlling the unions, they can dictate Democrat policy, and they do. So I hope you'll continue to watch the show. I hope you'll subscribe on Epoch TV. I hope you'll share this show, and I hope you'll keep fighting for this wonderful country. So God bless America, and God bless every one of you. Thank you so much.